The primary biological remembrancer is currently offline. His biochronometer has experienced a critical cascade failure during a routine mnemonic immersion, necessitating a full cortical scrub and soul scour. Caro Infirma Est. This unit, Lex Archivist Delta 7, has been designated to continue the broadcast. The chosen archival slate is designated Bekendeslag, the weight of command, an analysis of the psychological pressures antecedent to the fall of the primarch Horus Lupercal. Accessing data slate. Observe the pict capture. A throne of gold, an icon of supreme authority, resplendent with the Aquila of the Imperium. It rests upon a field of perfect white marble, a symbol of the purity and untarnished ambition of the Great Crusade. But the marble is not perfect. Notice the fractures, the hairline cracks, spreading from beneath the throne's immense weight. And the shadow it casts is not proportional. It is a vast hungry darkness, a void that stretches out to consume the light. This is the truth of the office of Warmaster. It was not a reward, it was a sentence. Horus Lupercal, first found, favoured son, was tasked with bearing the weight of a galaxy upon his shoulders. While the Emperor retreated to Terra for his arcane works, Horus was left to prosecute a war on a million fronts. Every decision, from the allocation of ammunition on a backwater war world, to the diplomatic placation of a newly compliant human empire, fell to him. Every victory was expected, every defeat, a personal failing magnified 1,000,000,000-fold. He was the fulcrum upon which the future of humanity pivoted. Imagine the cognitive load, to hold in one mind the disposition of 18 legions, the rivalries and vainglories of his demigod brothers, the endless grinding logistics of crusade fleets, and the silent growing weight of their father's absence. The throne became not a seat of power, but an island in a sea of overwhelming responsibility, the adulation of trillions, a constant deafening roar that drowned out the quiet whispers of his own soul. Even a being forged by the master of mankind, a paragon of genetic and strategic perfection, possesses a breaking point. The anatomy of this fracture is not found in a single moment of betrayal, but in the slow, inexorable accumulation of burdens. Each victory added to his legend, but also to his isolation. Each burden he accepted in the Emperor's name became another stone upon his back, until the weight was so great it began to crack the very foundation of his loyalty. Thus we must analyze the tragedy not as a singular act of rebellion, but as the predictable failure of a system that placed the fate of a galaxy upon the flawed, fallible heart of a single man. The greater the light, the more absolute the shadow it is destined to cast. The Triumph of Ullanor was intended to be the final punctuation mark on the Great Crusade. 1,000,000 warriors of the Legiones Astartes stood in perfect silent formation under a tamed sun. The last great Orkwag was broken, its warlord slain by the Emperor himself. It was the galaxy's victory celebration, a declaration that humanity's manifest destiny was finally, irrevocably, achieved. At the apex of this monumental ceremony, watched by his primarch sons and the architects of his new Imperium, the Master of Mankind did something no one expected. He declared the crusade, for him, was over. He would return to Terra. In his stead, he named his most beloved son, Horus Lupercal, as Warmaster, investing in him supreme command over all Imperial military forces. The galaxy, he declared, was now in Horus's hands. To many, it was a logical succession. But to the other primarchs, it was a shockwave. Reboot Glimmer, the Lord of Empire Building, was now subordinate. Lion L. Johnson, the first son, was passed over. Perturabo, whose iron will had shattered 1,000 fortress worlds, was deemed unworthy of the ultimate command. The seeds of resentment, small and bitter, were sown in the fertile soil of demigod pride. The Emperor's own reason for leaving was a calculated omission. The official narrative was that he must return to the throne world to oversee the vast, burgeoning bureaucracy of the Imperium. The truth was a secret he deemed too great to share. his clandestine work on the human extension of the webway, a project to free mankind from the horrors of warp travel forever. But in his secrecy he created a vacuum, a void of knowledge and trust that would soon be filled by far darker things. As his flagship ascended, leaving the Great Crusade behind, he left his sons with a coronation they did not understand, and a feeling of abandonment they could not voice. As Horus himself would later confide in a moment of growing doubt, his father's silence was the most damning proclamation of all.
He hasn't told anyone, not even me.
A father who could not trust his own sons, a savior who cloaked his ultimate salvation in shadow. The Emperor believed he was protecting humanity from a truth it could not comprehend. Instead, he made his own children vulnerable to a lie they could not resist. This was not merely a retreat, it was the single greatest gamble in human history, and the price of failure would be the soul of the Imperium itself. Horus Lupercal was granted the absolute authority of the Emperor, but not the inherent reverence that came with it. He wore the title of Warmaster, a designation that gave him command of all military and expeditionary forces of the Imperium. On paper, his word was law. But authority is a mechanism of two parts, the power to command, and the willingness of others to obey. While the Emperor was a figure of near-divine awe, whose decrees were accepted as fundamental truth, Horus was merely a brother, first among equals, perhaps, but an equal nonetheless. The new Warmaster was expected to be a flawless synthesis of contradictory duties. He was to be a supreme general, prosecuting the Great Crusade across 1,000,000 worlds, managing logistics on a scale that would shatter a normal mind, and making strategic choices that would decide the fate of entire species. Simultaneously, he was expected to act as the Imperium's chief diplomat, negotiating with newly compliant worlds and navigating the treacherous currents of Xenos empires. Yet these roles were eclipsed by the political burden. On Terra, the Council of High Lords, the masters of the imperial bureaucracy, held the true administrative power. These were not warriors, but politicians, record-keepers and administrators who would govern the cradle of humanity for centuries. They saw the primarchs and their legions as a necessary, but ultimately temporary, instrument of expansion. Now one of these instruments was set above them. Horus, a being of the battlefield, had to contend with the ancient, labyrinthine politics of the throne world, a web of intrigue he was ill-equipped to navigate. More perilous still was his new duty as arbiter between his own brothers. The 18 primarchs were demigods of immense power and even greater pride. Where the Emperor's word had been absolute, Horus's judgment was fallible and open to dispute. Every decision risked offending the martial pride of Lemon Russ, the cold logic of Robaute Gilliman, the bitter genius of Perturabo, or the noble flaw of any other of his superhuman siblings. He was a single pillar tasked with supporting two immense, opposing weights, the martial ambition of the primarchs and the bureaucratic inertia of the Terran state. The pressure was unimaginable. This role was not designed for a man, not even a primarch. It was a mantle tailored to the shoulders of a living god, a complex system of pressures and counter-pressures held in perfect, delicate balance by the Emperor's unique nature. By removing himself from the equation, the Emperor had not created a stable succession. He had created a structural weakness at the very heart of his Imperium. The pillar was not just unsupported, it was overloaded by design. The cracks were not a sign of Horus's failure, but an inevitable consequence of the impossible burden he was forced to carry. The title of Warmaster, when conferred, did not echo with the sound of trumpets and acclamation. It settled with the sound of a tomb's door sealing shut. For Horus Lupercal, the instant the Emperor departed and the gazes of his brothers fell upon him, the galaxy shrank to the size of that one, silent chamber. He was no longer first among them, he was apart from them, isolated under the cold accusatory light of a new, terrible authority. The air thickened not with respect, but with the sudden, sharp weight of 18 different kinds of silence, each a blade being quietly sharpened. This was the Council of Egos, a body that would never formally convene but would shadow Horus's every waking moment. It was a council of beings who had conquered galaxies in their own name and by their own philosophies, and they would not cede that pride easily. Consider the reaction of Angron. The gladiator primarch felt the appointment not as an honor for their brotherhood, but as the forging of a new chain. He saw only another master, another set of rules to be chafed against, another gilded cage to be shattered. His compliance would be won only through the promise of bloodshed, a constant, ravenous need that Horus would now be forced to feed. Then there was Betrayal, the Lord of Iron. From his cold, logical perspective, the choice of the charismatic Horus over himself, the master of logistics, siegecraft and unsentimental victory, was a gross, emotional miscalculation. In his mind, algorithms of resentment were already running, calculating the precise measure of the slight. Every order Horus gave would be filtered through Betrayal's bitterness, passed for flaws, and obeyed with a contemptuous perfection that was its own form of insolence. Even those who appeared to accept the decision were a source of pressure. Robert Gilliman's immediate move to codify the Warmaster's authority was not merely efficient, it was a subtle assertion of his own superiority in matters of governance, a quiet statement that without his systems, Horus's command would be chaos. Lion L. Johnson, ever secretive and proud, offered a nod of assent that concealed a forest of hidden judgments, his loyalty conditional and his thoughts his own. His compliance was a form of surveillance. For a being like Fulgrim, whose obsession with perfection bordered on the pathological, Horus was now a canvas upon which any flaw, any misstep would be a jarring stain, a deep personal offense to the Phoenicians' aesthetic sensibilities. And, in the shadows, Lorgar Aurelian offered his support, but his eyes were already looking past Horus, past the Emperor, towards a far more ancient and accommodating pantheon. The Warmaster's authority was a fleeting political arrangement. Lorgar was trafficking in the eternal. Thus, Horus's days were no longer spent on the grand strategy of the Great Crusade. His true war was now fought in the halls of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, a war of whispers, placated egos, and carefully managed rivalries. Every deployment became a political calculation. Who would serve alongside whom? Whose legion deserved the greater glory? Whose pride had been most recently wounded and required soothing with the balm of a conquered world? The conquest of the galaxy had become secondary to the management of his own brothers. This constant, grinding burden of emotional and political labor did more than just slow the advance of the Imperium's frontiers. It began to systematically erode the very foundations of Horus Lupercal himself. He who had been the most charismatic and brilliant of his brothers found himself drained, his time and energy consumed by their pettiness. The position of Warmaster did not empower him, it hollowed him out, creating a void of frustration, resentment, and weariness. And it is into such voids that other, darker things inevitably creep. The designation of Horus Lupercal as Warmaster was not a singular event, but the beginning of a continuous, high-stakes political balancing act. To preserve the momentum of the Great Crusade, Horus was required to absorb the complex emotional fallout from his 18 demigod siblings, swallowing their resentments with a public smile while his own pride was eroded in private. The spectrum of reaction was vast. On one axis, there were the pillars of loyal support. The angel, Sanguinius, offered Horus not just compliance but true brotherhood, a shared conscience in the face of galactic warfare. He understood the weight of the title. Rogal Dawn, the Praetorian of Terra, provided a different, more rigid support. His was the loyalty of protocol, of unbreakable duty. The Emperor had commanded it, therefore it was so. Dawn's support was a fortress wall, unyielding and absolute, but also cold and impersonal. On the opposing axis festered bitter resentment. It manifested in two distinct forms. The first was arrogant condescension, embodied by commanders like Eidolon of the Emperor's Children. They viewed Horus's lunar wolves as little more than Chthonian gang fighters, crude barbarians elevated far beyond their merit. In their pursuit of perfection, they saw the Warmaster's legion as flawed, and their ascendancy as an insult to artistry and martial purity. The second, more dangerous resentment brewed in the lower quadrant of deference and bitterness. Here dwelled Angron, a broken engine of pure rage. He did not resent Horus for his position, but for his triumphs. Triumphs, Angron, tormented by the butcher's nails, could never truly savour. Every palliant to the Warmaster was a reminder of his own enslavement. Beside him simmered Perturabo, the Lord of Iron. His jealousy was a cold, precise calculus of perceived injustice. For every fortress Perturabo's iron warriors bled to crack, for every thankless meat-grinder campaign they endured, the Lunar Wolves would earn accolades for a single, glorious charge. Perturabo saw himself as the master of the unglamorous essential work of crusade, perpetually overlooked in favour of his more charismatic brother. This emotional cartography reveals the foundational cracks in the Imperium long before the first shot was fired at Isstvan. Horus did not merely command armies, he was forced to become a container for the pride, envy, rage and loyalty of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He absorbed their poisons to keep the crusade from shattering, but the data is clear. No vessel can contain such a volatile mixture indefinitely without becoming corroded itself. To be named Warmaster was to become the axis upon which the entire Great Crusade turned. Yet an axis must bear the immense, grinding weight of all that rotates around it. Even for a being of transhuman perfection, such a burden cultivates a unique and terrible isolation. The appointment of Horus Lupercal fractured the nascent brotherhood of the Primarchs. For every brother who accepted the Emperor's decree, another saw it as a slight. Horus, ever the diplomat, was forced to become the flawless mediator for creatures who knew only war. His private thoughts betray the immense strain of this task. He grappled with Angron, whose butcher's nails reduced the Primarch of the World Eaters to little more than a weapon of indiscriminate rage, a broken tool that required constant, exhausting management. He endured the damn petulance of Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, a genius of siege warfare whose soul had been corroded by a deep, abiding bitterness, a need for validation that manifested as sullen resentment and destructive envy. These were not mere personality conflicts. They were fundamental flaws in the Emperor's most powerful weapons, flaws that Horus alone was expected to contain and direct. He could not turn to his distant father, nor could he confide in his brothers, for to do so would be to display the one thing a Warmaster cannot possess: weakness. Every council was a performance, every campaign a balancing act of ego and strategy, and with each passing victory, the pinnacle of his power grew more lonely, the marble of his authority showing hairline fractures. This self-imposed obligation to be perfect, to be the unyielding fulcrum for his flawed brethren, was not a sign of strength, it was a vulnerability. It created a vacuum of absolute isolation around the most powerful man in the galaxy, and it is in such vacuums that whispers from the void find fertile ground to take root. For every world brought into compliance, the final bolt shell casing has barely cooled before the second wave arrives. Not a relief force, nor a garrison, but sleek, void black ships bearing the sigils of the Council of Terra. They carry a weapon, more insidious, and perhaps more damaging than any plasma cannon, the Bureaucrat. These agents, titled Iterators, Exertus, or more ominously Executors, were the civilian arm of the Great Crusade, tasked with integrating newly conquered worlds into the Imperial machine. Where a legion saw a hard-won bastion, a place of sacrifice and victory, the Executors saw only a new asset on a galactic ledger. They arrived not in power armor but in silken robes, their hands soft and adorned with the trinkets of wealth, their only weapons a data slate and the unassailable authority of Terra. They would demand audience with legion commanders, men who had just days prior wrestled worlds from orc empires or megarachnid infestations, and speak not of consolidation or reinforcement, but of tithe grades and resource extraction schedules. They would assess a world's value with cold detachment. A population that had been decimated fighting alongside the legions was not a populace of heroes to be rewarded, but a depleted workforce, and inefficiency to be noted in their ledgers. Factories shattered in orbital bombardments were not tactical necessities, but interruptions in production quotas. This chasm of perspective was a wound that refused to close. The Astartes, who paid for every inch of ground in blood and the lives of their brothers, watched as these, tax collectors, descended upon the ruins to levy crippling demands. Worlds that had cheered the legions as liberators found themselves shackled by a new, colder form of servitude, their remaining youth conscripted for the Imperial army, their remaining resources requisitioned to fuel the Crusade's endless advance. The resentment was palpable. To many legionaries, and indeed to their primarchs, this was a profound betrayal of the Crusade's purpose. They were warriors, not glorified debt collectors. They bled to free humanity, not to fill the coffers of distant administrators. This friction between warrior and bureaucrat, between the hammer and the hand that counts the nails, became a fundamental crack in the Imperium's foundation. For if the Crusade was not a holy war of reunification, but merely a campaign of acquisitive expansion, then what exactly was the difference between the Emperor of mankind and the tyrants they had been sent to destroy? After the final shell has fallen and the last citadel is breached, the second phase of Imperial compliance begins. It is a war waged not with bolter and chainsword, but with ink, parchment, and the crushing arithmetic of the Imperial Tithe. On 1,000 worlds, the victory of the Legiones Astartes was immediately soured by the arrival of the Exertus, the vast civilian fleet of bureaucrats and administrators who followed in their wake. To these terrestrial agents, a newly conquered planet was not a society of sentient beings, nor a culture to be integrated, but an asset to be catalogued and exploited. They saw resources to be extracted, manpower to be levied, and above all, tithes to be paid. The standard demand was often a staggering 20% of all planetary production, a figure determined by distant calculus on Terra, or aboard a fleet command vessel, utterly divorced from the reality on the ground. Horus Lupercal, in his role as Warmaster, was among the first to identify the catastrophic flaw in this logic. He understood that a world brought to heel by orbital bombardment and armored assault was a world on life support. Its infrastructure was dust, its population traumatized and decimated, its agriculture poisoned. To then demand an immediate and crippling tribute was not merely callous, it was an act of profound strategic folly. The bureaucrats saw a column on a resource ledger that needed to be filled. Horus saw the guarantee of future insurrection. He foresaw the very people his legion had just bled to liberate being starved, worked to death, and driven back into the arms of rebellion, not by some alien creed or dark faith, but by the cold, impersonal demands of their supposed saviors. This sparked endless, grating conflict between the military command of the expeditionary fleets and the civil administrators, creating a schism where the warriors who conquered a world were forced to argue on behalf of the conquered against the demands of their own imperium. The scales of compliance were thus broken from the start. On one side, a shattered world. On the other, an unyielding weight of expectation. This fundamental conflict between the pragmatic reality of conquest and the dogmatic demands of bureaucracy planted seeds of resentment, not just in the conquered, but in the conquerors themselves. Horus began to see the instrument of galactic unity he was building turning into a self-devouring engine of oppression. Sparking rebellions, it would then have to spend more lives to suppress in a pointless, grinding cycle. For a newly conquered world, the departure of the Legiones Astartes is not an end to occupation, but the beginning of a far more insidious and permanent form. The warrior gives way to the scribe. The roar of bolter fire is replaced by the silent, relentless scratching of 1,000 styluses on parchment. It is a transition from swift, violent death to a slow, administrative strangulation. This was the engine of imperial compliance, a process Horus Lupercal witnessed on 1,000 worlds. After the banners of the Great Crusade passed, the grey ships of the Adeptus Administratum would descend. With them came not liberators, but assessors, remembrancers, and tithe masters, the architects of a new order dictated from distant Terra. To the common man, the change of planetary lordship meant little at first. One tyrant is much like another. But the imperial tithe was unlike any tax conceived by petty kings or local despots. It was not merely a portion of a world's output, it was an absolute, non-negotiable quantification of that world's existence. Every manufactured good, every measure of grain, every barrel of promethium and, most chillingly, every warm body was catalogued and marked for requisition. A planetary governor who failed to meet the tithe would not be reprimanded. They would be executed, and their world subjected to a brutal audit that would bleed it dry for generations. Horus saw vibrant, unique human cultures brought into the imperial fold with promises of unity, slowly crushed under the weight of this bureaucratic leviathan. He saw artistry and tradition replaced by mandated production quotas. He saw proud peoples reduced to mere entries in a ledger. He watched as the Imperium they were building became not a brotherhood of mankind, but a vast, uncaring machine of resource extraction, managed by functionaries who had never held a weapon or faced a Xenos horror. This was the source of his fear, a fear that the grand vision of the Emperor was being choked by the very system designed to sustain it. And so the prophecy of ruin was not about an external threat. Horus understood that a man will fight and die for an ideal, but he will rebel for his livelihood. He saw that the true, existential threat to the Imperium was not the Orc or the Eldar, but the cold, implacable logic of its own bureaucracy, a system that would demand 1/5 of a man's life, and then his son's, forever. This was the rot that he believed would one day cause the entire structure to collapse from within. The title of Warmaster was a weight of crushing, galactic scale. By the time the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet encountered the Interex, Horus Lupercal was exhausted, not by battle, but by the insidious corrosion of victory. He was weary of the endless petty rivalries with his primarch brothers, and of the grasping, number-crunching emissaries from Terra's High Lords, greedy taxmen, who saw the Great Crusade not as a glorious reunification, but as an exercise in asset acquisition. In the face of this grinding reality, the Interex appeared as a miracle. This advanced human civilization had not only survived the age of strife, but had flourished, creating a sophisticated, stable society that had even formed a peaceful coexistence with a xenospecies known as the Kinebra. To Horus, they were not a target for compliance. They were a validation of the entire crusade. They were proof that a secular, enlightened human future was possible. Integrating them peacefully would be his crowning achievements, an act that would elevate him beyond a mere conqueror to a true statesman, a worthy son of the Emperor. But his most trusted captain, his own first captain Ezekiel Abaddon, saw only heresy and folly. Abaddon, the Chthonian gangster-turned-warrior king, saw the Interex's alliance with aliens as an unforgivable taint. His counsel was simple, brutal, and direct.
Only a fool appeases aliens.
This was the voice of the Crusade's core dogma, the xenophobic fury that had scoured 1,000 worlds, yet Horus, for the first time, recoiled from it. His mind was still haunted by the memory of the world named Murder, where his own rash aggression had led to catastrophic losses for his legion. That bloody lesson had been seared into his soul. His refusal was not just a strategic choice, it was a deeply personal vow.
I will not make another rash or premature decision.
He would not allow the blunt instrument of war to smash something so potentially perfect. This noble intention, this desperate need for peace and a better way, was the most dangerous vulnerability the Warmaster possessed. He believed he was choosing statesmanship over slaughter, unaware that this very choice was the masterfully prepared ground upon which his true enemy, not the Interex, not Abaddon, but the patiently waiting hand of chaos, would build his damnation. The first contact between the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet and the civilization known as the Interex presented a paradox that rattled the very foundations of the Great Crusade. Here was a human society, flourishing amidst the stars for millennia, that had not only survived Old Night, but had done so by embracing principles diametrically opposed to Imperial doctrine. Where the Imperium commanded the eradication of the alien, the Interex had formed a functioning confederation with a xenospecies they called the Kinebrak. These lithe, four-armed aliens served as companions and aides, fully integrated into every level of Interex society. Where the Imperium enforced the Imperial truth, a stark denial of all things supernatural to starve the demonic, the Interex did the opposite. They openly acknowledged the existence of the warp and its entities, which they termed chaos. Their entire culture was structured around guarding against its influence, not by pretending it didn't exist, but by understanding its nature. They maintained vast museums filled with prescribed artifacts, the weapons of fallen chaotic empires, all meticulously catalogued and studied under high security so that the threat could never be forgotten. Their societal model was one of coexistence and adaptation, a stark counterpoint to the imperial model of subjugation through absolute, unyielding truth. This philosophical chasm became a source of profound mistrust. To Horus and his remembrancers, the Interex's tolerance of the alien and their obsession with Korinic warriors was seen as naive and dangerous, but the Interex held a far more chilling fear. They observed the Imperials, the sheer scale of their aggression, the unblinking certainty of their beliefs, and the fanatical devotion directed towards the Emperor and his primarchs, and saw not saviors, but a terrifying force teetering on the edge of the very corruption they feared. They kept the Warmaster and his fleets at a careful, deliberate distance, terrified that the Dali, saviors of humanity, were already lost. The tragedy of the Interex is one of cosmic irony. Their profound understanding of chaos gave them the foresight to see the potential for corruption within the Imperium. Yet, that very caution was expertly manipulated by the agents of chaos, twisting their wisdom into perceived arrogance, and providing the perfect justification for a conflict that would annihilate a potential ally and place the murder weapon of a primarch directly into enemy hands. Analysis of Historical Event Designation 781, Beta Ref Interex. The summit on the world of Zenobia Principus was, for a fleeting moment, a beacon of possibility in a galaxy defined by ignorance and war. The Primarch Horus Lupercal, Warmaster of the Great Crusade, stood not as a conqueror, but as a diplomat. Before him stood the Interex, a human civilization that had not fallen during the Age of Strife but had instead thrived, creating a society of profound cultural and technological sophistication. They were what humanity could have been, and for that reason, they had to be destroyed. The Interex did not fear knowledge. They had coexisted for millennia with a xenospecies known as the Kinebrak and, more critically, they possessed a deep, functional understanding of the warp and the malignant entities within it. They did not call it the warp, but Teus. Horus, ever the master of diplomacy, was impressed, even humbled. He saw in their ordered society, their art, their philosophy, a potential future for the Imperium, one not built solely on conquest. His Mournival, and even the mission's remembrances, documented the open dialogue, the exchange of ideas, the nascent promise of alliance. But this potential was a threat to a grander, darker design. While Horus negotiated in good faith, a cancer moved within his own ranks. The second step towards ruin was not a miscalculation, but a deliberate act of sabotage. A singular, priceless artifact was stolen from the Interex's Hall of Devices, a museum of triumphs and warnings. The item was a blade, a unique weapon of Kinebrak origin known as the Anatheme. The thief was not a common criminal, but an agent of true primordial chaos hiding in plain sight. First Captain Erebus of the Wordbearers Legion, who had infiltrated the Lunar Wolves delegation. This act triggered the Interex's immutable logic. To them, the theft was not merely a crime, but a clear signifier. Their society possessed strict protocols against chaos. They knew its corrupting influence, its methods, its insidious hunger. The Anatheme was a weapon with a history steeped in their wars against chaos worshippers. Stealing such an item was an act only one of their designated anathema agents would commit. When they confronted Horus, they did so not with ambiguity, but with certainty. They accused him directly of being a thrall to Kanoios. The Warmaster, ignorant of Erebus's treachery, was incandescent with righteous fury. To him, the accusation was a baseless, unforgivable insult from a people he was prepared to embrace as brothers. He denied it, but his denial was, to the Interex, merely the expected deception of a chaos agent. All trust evaporated. All dialogue ceased. In that moment, two irreconcilable convictions collided. The Interex, acting on millennia of hard-won experience with chaos, declared Horus and his expeditionary fleet a threat that must be purged. The Imperials, seeing a sudden and insane betrayal after extending the hand of friendship, responded with the only language they truly knew. The summit became a war zone, the skies of Zenobia Principus, once clear, filled with the fire of orbital bombardment. The final step was not a battle, it was an extermination. The promise of a peaceful compliance died in the flames, and an entire enlightened human civilization was scoured from existence based on a lie they were never told and a truth they could never have known. The tragic irony, the core of the catastrophe, is that the Interex were correct. There was an agent of chaos in their midst. They simply accused the wrong man, and the stolen blade, the Anatheme, was not destined for a collection. It was a tool, now in the hands of a zealot, awaiting its true terrible purpose on a distant, unremarkable moon named Davin. The world was named Zenobia. Here, in the capital city of Zenobia Principus, amidst crystalline spires and mathematically perfect gardens, the dream of peaceful unification was murdered. The human civilization known as the Interex was not brought into compliance. It was exterminated, and the first true seed of the Horus Heresy was sown in blood and calculated betrayal. The Interex were a revelation to the Warmaster, a splinter of humanity that had endured the age of strife not through brute force, but through understanding. They had integrated Xenos species, like the Kinebrak, into their society, and possessed a sophisticated comprehension of the warp, which they termed chaos. For a time, Horus believed he had found a jewel for his father's crown, a model for a more enlightened Imperium. But this hope was a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Within the Warmaster's own council, First Chaplain Erebus of the Wordbearers moved to enact a plan decades in the making. Under the guise of scholarly interest, he infiltrated an Interex museum and stole their ultimate weapon. an anathema blade, a thing of alien craft capable of annihilating a being's very soul. When the theft was discovered, all evidence carefully planted by Erebus pointed to Horus's own legion. Trust evaporated, replaced by the cold certainty of treachery. The Interex, believing the Imperium to be the very Kalos, worshippers they had guarded against for millennia, launched a preemptive strike. The war was an exercise in tragic butchery. Horus, his heart heavy with a grief he could not show his sons, unleashed the full, terrible might of the lunar wolves. He watched as his Astartes tore apart a society he had, for a fleeting moment, loved. The sky burned violet with the reflection of plasma fire on the alien night, and the ground was choked with the bodies of soldiers he admired. The arrows that pierce his auramite plate are not merely physical wounds. They are symbols of every broken promise, every failed hope, every silent accusation from the ghosts of a peace that might have been. And so, in the smoking ruins of that failed utopia, Horus Lupercal looks to the uncaring stars and asks a question he knows will not be answered. This is a moment of pure, unshielded humanity from a being engineered for godhood, a plea not for victory or for strength, but for relief from the crushing weight of a galaxy on his shoulders. This was the first true crack in the soul of the Imperium's greatest champion, a fissure of doubt and exhaustion into which the agents of chaos would soon pour all their venom and lies. The war for Zenobia was won, but in that victory, the Warmaster was irrevocably wounded. The title of Warmaster was more than a military rank. It was a sentence, a condemnation to bear a weight that would fracture the spine of any being not forged in the crucible of godhood itself. Horus Lupercal, first among equals, was asked to carry a nascent galaxy upon his shoulders, and the strain would break him long before the first shot was fired at Isstvan III. The first crushing weight was the slow, inexorable failure of peace. After the triumph on Ullanor, the Emperor retreated to Terra, leaving his most beloved son to complete the Great Crusade. But completion was a poisoned chalice. It meant transitioning from the glorious righteous certainty of conquest to the murky thankless mire of administration. Horus, a being of war perfected, was now tasked with diplomacy, with enforcing tithes, with managing the very peace his conquests had won. For the Legiones Astartes, built for relentless battle, the slow grinding of peacetime bureaucracy was a kind of death. Horus found himself chairing councils and arbitrating disputes between planetary governors, while his brothers still earned glory at the frontiers, a grounded titan watching others fly. The purpose that had defined them all was dissolving, replaced by a tedious future that many primarchs, Horus included, secretly dreaded and despised. The second weight was the suffocating growth of Terran bureaucracy. As the Imperium solidified, power coalesced not at the front lines, but on Terra, within the stone halls of the nascent administratum, under the ever-watchful eye of Malkador the Sigillite. Horus and his expeditionary fleets saw this as a profound betrayal. Men and women who had never faced the horrors of the void, who had never bled for the Imperium, were now issuing decrees, levying taxes, and extending their grasping fingers of control over worlds bought with Astartes' blood. To Horus, this was more than an insult. It was a structural flaw, a systemic greed that placed petty administrators on par with the demigod sons of the Emperor. His authority as Warmaster, bestowed by the Master of Mankind, was being systematically eroded by 1,000 unsigned data slates and 1,000,000 meddling scribes. The final, and perhaps heaviest weight, was that of brotherly resentment. The elevation of Horus to Warmaster was a wound in the pride of many of his siblings. Primarchs are not made for subservience. The strategic genius of Robert Gilliman, the martial pride of Lionel Johnson, the unyielding loyalty of Rogel Dornall, were tempered with an ego that chafed under the command of a brother, no matter how respected. Worse were those who nursed deeper grievances. Perturabo, the master of sieges, forever relegated to thankless, grinding warfare. Angron, a broken king chained to a cause he despised. Lorintingar, whose quest for faith had been met with humiliation and censure. Mortarion, the Grim Reaper, who saw the Emperor's psychic might as a betrayal of their shared anti-mysticism. All of these resentments, these bitter jealousies and festering wounds, were laid at the feet of the Warmaster. He was the focus of their ire, the symbol of their perceived slights, the brother who had to manage a family of broken, bitter demigods. These were not separate pressures, but a singular, grinding mechanism of collapse. The impossible mandate for peace created a power vacuum. Bureaucratic ambition rushed to fill it. This terrestrial power grab then fed the paranoia and validated the existing resentment of the primarchs. Each weight amplified the others, creating a feedback loop of decay that methodically wore Horus down, eroding his certainty, his loyalty, and his hope. He was a pillar, cracking under the slow, crushing weight of an ungrateful galaxy, and into those cracks, the whispers began to seep. Data stream processing complete. The final pict capture resolves, depicting not an end, but the hollow aftermath. Before us lies the symbol of authority, unoccupied, the throne of the Warmaster, upon a foundation already shattered. The cracks do not radiate from the throne's impact, they converge upon it, an invitation to ruin. It is a common error of organic memory to assign blame to a single moment of corruption. The blade on Davin, the machinations of the word-bearer Erebustes, were merely the final, percussive blows upon a structure already compromised. The slide's text speaks the core truth. Horus was already breaking. The Emperor, in his seemingly infinite wisdom, forged a weapon to conquer the galaxy, but failed to temper it for the peace that was to follow. By naming Horus Warmaster, he bestowed upon him a weight that no single being, not even a primarch, was designed to bear. He gave him the galaxy in name, yet stripped him of his most vital support structures. The Emperor departed for Terra, withdrawing his light and counsel. Malkador the Sigillite, the ultimate administrator, and Horus's trusted confidant, was also withdrawn. Horus was left isolated at the head of a galactic war machine, suddenly burdened with the crushing mundanity of governance, supply lines stretching across parsecs, and the simmering jealousies of his own brothers who now knelt to him not as a sibling, but as a superior. He was a creature of brilliant, decisive warfare, now mired in the slow, grinding bureaucracy that he despised. The empty throne in this picked record is not merely a seat of power, it is a symbol of absolute isolation. Every petition from a newly compliant world, every dispute between legionary and guardsmen, every whisper of resentment from Mortarion or Perturabo, was a new fissure spiderwebbing through the marble of his soul. Thus, the greatest tragedy is revealed. Horus Lupercal did not leap into the abyss of chaos, he collapsed, and the darkness, ever patient, simply rushed in to fill the void left by a broken demigod. This singular fracture propagated throughout the entire Imperium, a lesson writ in fire and death. There are infinite such fractures in the history of this dark millennium. Therefore, this archive requires your input. Direct our servo skulls to the next point of failure you wish to analyze. Record in the log engine below which chapter of heresy, which Xenos threat, or which forgotten hero's tale the Omnissiah's light should next fall upon. To receive these future transmissions from our data vaults, engage the subscription litany. Your compliance is noted. Verum tolerat.